Today's video is all about taking your die cuts to the next level. I'm going to show you how to use a gel plate and your ink pads to create colorful textured designs that completely transform your die cuts. It's such a fun and easy way to add extra depth, dimension, and unique touch to your cards. The sets that I'm going to be using today to create this card is the Autumn Leaf Branch die from Simon Says Stamp and the Thankful and Grateful stamp set. So this is a really old stamp set and I have a coordinating die for it. I did find the stamp set to link it, but I did not find the coordinating die. So use what you have in your stash. I went ahead and die cut out 5 leaves out of a heavyweight cardstock, but I want to build around the sentiment because that's going to be the focal point. So I'm going to start by stamping out my sentiment and getting that all laid out so I can build around that. I'm going to be using white cardstock for this, and I'm going to stamp the word thankful down. So I'm using my mini Misty to do this. I'm just placing that stamp set down onto my cardstock, picking that up with the door of the Misty, and then I'm going to ink this up in a black ink. Now, I do think a gold embossing would tie in really well, but I wasn't quite sure yet how everything was going to turn out, so I always like to start with black, and then later on, if I want to heat emboss and add it over the top, I can definitely do that. Then I'm also going to be stamping a smaller sentiment. And for that, I'm going to bring out some black cardstock. I have one of the skinny sentiments picked out. I'm going to place that down onto the cardstock. Again, pick that up with the door of the Misty. And then I'm going to condition the cardstock with an anti-static powder tool, since I will be heat embossing this. I'm going to ink up the sentiment using a white pigment ink. It is my favorite way to do white heat embossing. And then I'm going to take that, sprinkle on some white embossing powder, and tap off any of my excess. After my heat tool is nice and hot, I can bring that in and melt that embossing powder, and I have a perfectly white heat embossed sentiment. Now, since I did use a powder tool, I'm going to buff away that excess powder with a Swiffer cloth, and then I'm using the sentiment label die from Simon Says Stamp to trim that out into a nice, even, skinny sentiment. To make sure I'm getting a nice clean edge on both sides, I'm going to line that die back up over the sentiment strip kind of right after that last word and then run that through the die cut machine again. I use the coordinating die that I have to die cut out the word thankful, and I also die cut it out 2 more times from white cardstock. I added a liquid glue to the top of those plain white cardstock pieces, and then just using my tweezers, I'm picking up my stamped one and placing that over the top. I want this a nice solid piece because it's going to go over all of those leaves. And I used that same sentiment label die to die cut out more pieces of cardstock so it's going to fit perfectly behind that sentiment strip. Again, I really want to have stability behind these sentiments since they are going to be layered over the top of those leaves. I like to do all of my gluing on top of a media mat. It is just a silicone mat that's really easy to clean up any excess glue. Now I can start getting an idea of where things are going to be placed. So I start with my sentiment because that's going to be the focal point. And then I'm going to bring in my die cut leaves, which again is just out of a heavyweight cardstock right now. And what I want to do is kind of have this trailing along one end to another. So giving some movement to my card. I'm taking the leaves and just really tucking them underneath the sentiment. So I'm going to have 3 of them up in this top left corner, and then I'll take the other 2 and have them trailing off down in the bottom right-hand corner of the sentiment. And then I'll take that smaller sentiment, I'll place it over the top, kind of right underneath that word thankful. And now that I have the basic design figured out, which I'm loving, I'm going to start working on my background. To create the background, I'm going to be using my gel plate, and I'm using, I think it's Trio 22 from Simon Says Stamp, Pawsitively Saturated Inks, and this is nutmeg, paprika, and allspice. I'm taking the first 2 colors, and I just dab them down onto the gel plate, and then I have this large brayer that I'm running across it to pick up that color and dragging that across some cardstock. I love creating abstract backgrounds like this, and really one swipe could have done it. I could have stopped right there, but I just kind of kept coming in, turning my cardstock and rolling that brayer across it. And I love those kind of little marks that the brayer is leaving. It's just a really fun design to have in your background without taking away from your focal point. So I felt like this could have been darker, so I'm bringing in the darkest color. I'm placing that or kind of pushing my ink pad down on the gel plate to transfer that color. picking that up with the brayer, and then coming in kind of around the corners. Now, in the end, I do have some pointers of the whole what would I have done differently, and I'll talk about that at the end. But for right now, I'm just trying to darken them colors. And then while I have that ink on there, I took another piece of cardstock, placed it down, put a sheet of copy paper over the top to really press in the cardstock to the gel plate. And that creates another background that I can save for a later date. Now, a way to elevate your die cuts, and I didn't think about this at first, but what you can do is take your ink, and I'm using, I believe that was Zest, and then I brought in maybe some nutmeg, and I put those down onto my gel plate. I'm going to blend those with my brayer, and I'm going to color my die cuts using my gel plate. I am not sure if I've ever done this before. If I have, it's been a while. And this is a really fun way to transfer color. You're also getting kind of a mix of colors. So I'm taking my die cuts, I'm placing them so that they face down onto that gel plate. I'm going to put as many as I can fit on here. I believe this is a 5x7 gel plate. And then I'll take that copy paper, place it back over the top, and I'm going to push that down really well. I'm trying to get in between all of the grooves to make sure I'm transferring that color. So while there are lots of ways to color die cuts, and I do go through quite a them on my YouTube channel, this one is really easy and gives such amazing results. So see all the different color combinations we have just by rolling that brayer over the top to spread the color and by our placement. Now, I had picked up some color with my brayer, so I'm going to put some of that color back onto the die cuts because I felt like the die cuts could have been a little bit brighter. I could have really done another application of color too, but this worked really well. I took the darkest color out of that trio. I placed it onto the gel plate. I'm sorry, I'm a little off screen there. And I'm going to add some of that darker color to the edges. Now you're going to notice that there is some white showing in the detail lines of the leaves, but I think, in my opinion, that helps make them almost look metallic in a way. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that I think the background needed to be a little bit darker for those leaves to really pop because I like some strong contrast. So I'm bringing in that darkest color. I think this was allspice and a blending brush, and I'm going to go around the outer edges. So it kind of brings more of a highlight to the center. I'm also going to add a little bit more interest by stamping some background text onto that piece of cardstock. So this is a red rubber stamp. I believe it's available in a clear stamp as well. And this one is called the thank you text, I think. I'm going to have everything that I use today linked down below in the video description and over on my blog if you're interested in any of the supplies that I'm using today. The color I'm going to use to do the stamping is, I believe this is the allspice. I just kind of sporadically stamped it onto the background, and I took my brayer and I just ran my brayer over the top. Not sure how much of a difference it made, but it's a neat idea to try. So if you do have some rubber brayers in your stash, give that a try with your background stamp. I started out by stamping light and then kind of came back and pushed a little harder to transfer more of the ink to get that to stand out a little bit more. I brought the background over to my splat box, and I have the antique linen distress spritz that I mixed with just a little bit of water to splatter the background with. I added my panel to a side folding card base that I just have tape runner on, and I'm placing that over the top so it's already attached to my card base now, and then I can start adhering my design. I went ahead and added the leaves the way I wanted them to go. And granted, I probably could have picked it up with some press and seal, but I don't know. I find this easier sometimes for me because then I can still kind of move and tweak things as I go. I'm just going to be using liquid glue to attach everything, and using my tweezers helps kind of get into those small areas and tuck it underneath the sentiment. A quick segment into what would I do differently is I would probably added another layer behind these leaves to make them pop up a little bit. That's if you want to add more dimension and give it more separation from the background. So step one, I guess, in what would I do different is adding a little bit more dimension to those leaves. But I was also keeping in mind that my sentiment is already stacked. So I do already have dimension there. And I'm going to be adding them with foam squares. So I needed to keep that in mind as I was doing this. I didn't want to get too bulky, but I do kind of wish I would have added more dimension to those leaves. Here is where I added thin foam squares behind that large thankful sentiment. Again, look in your stash if you have something similar to that would work for this. And then I have my smaller sentiment that I'm just gluing right underneath there. I didn't add any foam squares to that. I'm going to finish this off by applying some clear quartz sequence mix from Gina K Designs, and I'm going to call that good. But another segment into what would I do different is I would have made that background darker. I should have gone around the outer edges with maybe a darker brown. Now, this is not wrong and it's not a bad card, but if I were to redo it, I would make that background a little bit darker to get those leaves to pop out. And that's how easy it is to elevate your die cuts with a gel plate and just a few ink pads. So I hope this inspires you to try something new and give your die cuts a fresh artistic look. If you enjoyed this tutorial, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any crafty inspiration. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Here is another video that I think you may enjoy.